Now, friends, let me ask you something. Were they able to keep that promise? Did they obey that promise? Why, a few days later, when Moses went up in the mountain to get the law, they were worshiping a golden calf while he was gone, weren't they? So they broke it before it had scarcely gotten into their hands. They were not able to keep that promise. Tell me now.
Broken promises. This is the subject of the Amazing Facts Crusade message today. Speaker Joe Cruz introduces a fascinating series on the promises that failed. His message today, when Sunday came 3 days too late.
Some time ago, I held an evangelistic crusade in the city of Newark, Ohio. I had just completed the sermon on the Sabbath Christ gave the world. I stepped down from the platform to go to the rear to greet the people, and suddenly 3 young men loomed up in the aisle, blocking my way in the aisle. They had been seated on the front row. And one of them, in a big loud voice, said, Brother Joe, we were disappointed tonight the way you put us back under the old covenant with that Sabbath. Don't you realize we're living under the new covenant now, and we ought to keep Sunday instead of the Sabbath? Now listen, those young men were simply voicing a feeling that millions of Christians have. There are multitudes of people today who believe that the 10 Commandments is the old covenant, and that has vanished away. It has disappeared. It's been abolished, and therefore we don't have to worry about anything like that 4th commandment concerning the Sabbath or any of the other 10 Commandments as far as that's concerned. Now tonight, we want to address this question. Has the old covenant vanished away? Was the old covenant the 10 Commandments? Has it abolished God's great handwritten law that was written at Mount Sinai? These are the questions that we need to understand. Now, I'm going to be talking tonight about the covenants of God, and so we need to understand what a covenant is. So let's get a common understanding of it right now. A covenant is an agreement between 2 parties based upon mutual promises that people make to each other. Now, God has made a number of covenants. He's a very reasonable God, of course. He says, come now, let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. So God likes to reason with people. And He's made these agreements with individuals like Moses and David and Abraham, and then He made one with the nation of Israel. Now, I suppose that the most important covenant of all is the one called in the Bible the everlasting covenant. And that's the one made between the Father and Son way back in that vast eternity of the past. We don't know exactly when it happened. It was before the foundations of this world were laid. But there was an agreement between the Father and the Son, and Jesus offered Himself way back there in eternity to become the Savior of the world. In case of sin, Jesus provided for Himself to be that lamb or that sacrifice. And you know, friends, that's why Jesus is called the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Because it was back then that He really gave Himself and offered Himself. And the terms of that everlasting covenant have always remained the same. They've never changed, they've never diminished, they've never been altered at all. The terms were very simple. Anybody that had sinned could come and receive pardon freely by just asking for it, for applying in faith. They could be cleansed of all their sins. Now, that's the everlasting covenant. And that one continued to prevail as a great umbrella provision in spite of all the other individual covenants that God set up. With individuals or nations, the everlasting covenant was always there, providing its free remedy for the sin problem. Now, the covenant that we probably heard the most about is the one called in the Bible the Old Covenant. And then, of course, the New Covenant that came along to take its place when it vanished away. And that's what we're going to look into right now. That's the one, you see, that a lot of people claim was the 10 Commandments. They said that one that disappeared and was abolished, that was the 10 Commandments. So we're going to examine it this evening. But first, let's turn in our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 8 and read the story of these 2 covenants. And we're going to start reading there with verse 6. We'll have a number of verses now, so you can just follow along as I read. But now hath He obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also He is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. For finding fault with them, he saith, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws in their mind, and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. In that he saith a new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. So there it is, friends. That's the whole story. It does tell us indeed that an old covenant was inadequate, and it was abolished. It disappeared. It vanished away, and a new covenant came in to take the place of it. Now, the big question is this. Was that old covenant the Ten Commandments? Has that vanished away and disappeared, friends? I'm going to suggest to you tonight that even though the Ten Commandments are referred to a time or two in the Old Testament as a covenant, that is not the Old Covenant referred to here, which says that it disappeared and vanished away. That was not the Ten Commandments, and I'm going to prove it to you. Follow me closely now. I'm going to show to you what the Old Covenant was not, and it was not the Ten Commandments. How do we know that? What was wrong with the Old Covenant according to these verses? What was wrong with it? Well, first of all, it seemed to have poor promises in it, didn't it? Because it said that a new covenant was needed and was necessary that had better promises. Now, I can only assume that that old covenant had some weak promises in it or some poor promises in it. Now, let me ask you a question, friends, and you be very, very honest with me tonight. Do you know of any bad promises in the Ten Commandments? Why, of course not. Nobody can point to a bad promise or a weak promise there. In fact, turn with me here to Ephesians 6. And you're going to notice that Paul acknowledged no fault whatsoever in the promises of the Ten Commandments. Ephesians 6, verses 1 to 3. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Paul referred to one of the Ten Commandments that had a promise in it, and he said, this is a good thing. This is a wonderful promise about the blessing that will come to children for honoring their parents. So, friends, we'll have to say absolutely right now, without any reservation, this could not have been talking about the Ten Commandments. There are no bad promises there. Then, what else was wrong with the Old Covenant? Well, verse 7 says, For if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. You see, it was faulty. It had flaws in it. It had blemishes in it. It was far from being perfect. And as a result, it needed to be replaced. But here's my question now, friends. Are there any flaws or imperfections in the holy law of God, the Ten Commandments? Has anybody ever located one there and identified one there? Of course not. Psalm 19:7 says, The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. You come down to the New Testament there in Romans 7, verse 12, and it says, The commandments are just and holy and good. No man has been ever able to point out any kind of a flaw or a blemish or imperfection in the great moral law of God that He wrote with His own finger. No, this proves to us right now then that that old covenant which disappeared could not have been the Ten Commandments. What else was wrong with the old covenant that it had to be replaced? Drop down to verse 13 now and notice these words. In that he saith a new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. Now this says the old covenant disappeared, it vanished away. Did the Ten Commandments vanish away in the New Testament, friends? Do we find them disappearing, going out of sight, being abolished, being replaced, or anything like that? Why, of course not. Jesus quoted the Ten Commandments. Paul quoted the Ten Commandments. James quoted the Ten Commandments. They are reinforced and reaffirmed by almost all the writers of the New Testament. They are repeated in the writings of the New Testament writers. So that could not be then that the Old Covenant was that law. In fact, turn back to Romans 3, verse 31 with me for just a moment, and we'll see that the very opposite was true. In Romans 3 and verse 31, Paul writes these words. Now remember, this is the same writer in Romans who also wrote that chapter I've just read from there in Hebrews 8. Paul, I believe, was the author of Hebrews just like he was the author of the book of Romans. And here he says, do we then make void the law through faith? Now what's the question he's asking? Do we nullify the law of God because we've been saved by grace through faith? That's his question. And his answer here is, God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. Now friends, here he says that when we become Christians and enter into this new relationship of grace, coming under the new covenant, he says the law is established. And yet we read over in Hebrews 8 there that under the new covenant, the old covenant was to vanish away. Now tell me, how could the same law vanish away and be established at the same time? And it's the same writer talking. See, the same one who wrote Romans wrote Hebrews, and in one place he said the old covenant vanished away, and he says that the law of God is established. Well, surely this is not talking about the same thing. In fact, just to be absolutely certain of this, let's do something interesting. Let's read this verse in Romans 3:31, and instead of saying law in that text, let's put in the words old covenant. Now, if the old covenant and the law are the same things, then it should make a lot of sense to just put the words old covenant there instead of the word law. So let's read it that way. Do we then make void the old covenant through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the old covenant. Well, now that doesn't sound right at all, does it? Because we just read that the old covenant vanished away. And we cannot come here now and read that the old covenant is established. Well, of course not. You see, this is not talking about the same things at all. That Ten Commandment law, my friends, was not the old covenant that disappeared. And I think we have proven that without question. Now, we found out what it was not. Let's find out what it really was. Let's go back now and find out about the old covenant. Please come with me to Exodus chapter 19. We're going to discover that more than one covenant was made back at Sinai. Exodus 19, and I'm beginning to read now with verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Now God is making a proposal to the nation of Israel. He is suggesting that they enter into an agreement. He said, if you'll do something for me, I'll do something for you. If you'll keep my law and my word and my covenant, I will bless you and magnify you and make you my special, peculiar people. Now Moses, he said, go down and tell the people this. Present this proposal to them and see what they will say. Now here is the basis for an agreement or a covenant, friends, is it not? Promises that are being made to each other. God said, if you'll promise something to me, I'll promise something to you. He said, go down now, Moses, and find out if they'll accept this. What happened next? And Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. Now friends, is that a covenant or not? Yes, it is. Here's an agreement made between these two parties. God says, if you'll do something, I'll do something. And the people said, we'll do it. We accept the terms of that. We will obey you. Anything you say, we can do it. We're able to do it. And so, my friends, there you find that old covenant established, based upon the promises of the people. Now, notice that they didn't ask for any help, did they? They felt very adequate to do it all. They didn't say, well, Lord, you'll have to help us, but if you will, I think we can obey your law. No, they said, we can do it. Anything you say, we can do it. And so there you have the old covenant. But now, friends, it had to be ratified. You see, back in those days, everything was done with blood. In order to make it official, before it could really begin operating properly and legally, it had to be always sealed with blood. So let's turn here to the 24th chapter of Exodus and notice how this whole thing was ratified. In fact, beginning there with verse 3, "And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord has said will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning, and builded an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people, and they said, All that the Lord has said will we do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, Behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. Now, friends, notice that God really made the covenant concerning the words of the law, concerning the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments was not the covenant, but the covenant was made concerning obedience to the 10 Commandments. The people promised to keep the law, and God promised to bless them if they would. And then the whole thing was ratified or sealed by the sprinkling of blood. And the people again promised and said, Of course, we'll do anything you say, and we'll be obedient to all you tell us. Now, friends, let me ask you something. Were they able to keep that promise? Did they obey that promise? Why, a few days later, when Moses went up in the mountain to get the law, they were worshiping a golden calf while he was gone, weren't they? So they broke it before it had scarcely gotten into their hands. They were not able to keep that promise. Tell me now, are you beginning to see where the poor promises were in the old covenant? Can't you see that? The people didn't keep their part of it. God kept His part all right, no problem there. But the people broke theirs. They were not able to do it. And so we come back again to Hebrews 8 here, and we see very, very clearly why a new covenant was necessary. Very clearly we see. And we begin to understand what the weakness was and what the failure was in that agreement. Because in verse 8 it says, For finding fault with them, he saith, Behold, the days come when I'll make a new covenant. You see, it was the people who failed. God didn't fail. Everything was fine until they broke their word and disobeyed God's law even after promising that they were going to do it. Now, friends, what were the better promises of the new covenant? Go on down there in verse 10. Well, look at verse 9. He says, Not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant. See, he said, You're the ones who broke it. You didn't continue and keep it. And then he said, This is the covenant that I'll make. I will be to them a God. I will write my laws into their hearts. And I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. And I will remember their sins no more. Now who's making the promises, friends? It's God making the promises, you see. And this is why the new covenant is based upon better promises. The old one was based on the people and their weakness and their promises that they could not keep because they were trying to do it in their own human strength and by their own effort. You see, basically, friends, the difference between the old and the new covenant was this. That under the old covenant, the people were trying to keep the law by their own human effort and in their own strength without seeking any help from God. And it's impossible for anybody to keep that law of God, the holy spiritual law of God, in their own human strength and by their own effort. And so the people failed. Now, under the new covenant, God makes the promises. He says, I'll come into your heart and life. I'll write my law into your mind and into your heart. And I will be merciful to you. And I will do this and I'll do that. So you see, friends, how the two things differed. Under the old covenant, it was the same law written on the tables of stone. But the people were trying to do it alone. And under the new covenant, it's the same law written into the heart, written into the mind, into the regenerated nature that had been transformed by the power of the Spirit of God. So there's a big difference here now between these two covenants. Now, here's my next question. How was the new covenant ratified? The old covenant was ratified by what? By blood. Was the new covenant also ratified by blood? Yes, it was. Come to Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13, verses 20 and 21, and we read about the blood of the new covenant. Now the God of peace, that brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant, make you perfect in every good work to do His will, working in you that which is well-pleasing in His sight. Now, friends, do you see what's happening here under this new covenant, under this everlasting covenant? It says that through this blood of the covenant, He will make you perfect. It's not a matter of the people saying, we'll do it, we can obey, we can keep it. No, God says, I'll do it. I will make you perfect, working in you that which is well-pleasing. Oh, friends, there's a big difference between doing it ourselves and working it out ourselves and having Him work in us to bring perfection and that which is well-pleasing in His sight. So the new covenant then was ratified by the death of Jesus, by the blood of Christ on the cross. Both of them by blood. Both of them by blood. And so this shows us, let's go back to Romans 8. I want you to see something interesting here that fits right in with this particular point. Romans chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. Well, let's begin with verse 3. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. Let me ask you, what was it the law could not do for us because it was too weak? We were too weak to keep it in the flesh. Couldn't save us, could it? Could not save us. What the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God, sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. See, not by us, but in us. Of course, we'll do it, but He's doing it in us and through us. We're not providing the strength and power, friends. He's doing it. And so what we could not do because we were too weak in the flesh, God sent His Son Jesus here in the nature of man, who lived a life of perfect obedience to that law, and then Jesus offers to come into our lives and live out His own beautiful life of obedience in us as we allow Him to do that. And that is the new covenant experience that He wants us to have, friends. It really is. Now we are ready to read a verse in Hebrews again. Please come back with me to Hebrews chapter 9, and we're reading verses 16 and 17. For where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. Now let me impress something upon you right here. Maybe you already knew that the word testament in the Bible is exactly the same as the word covenant. The original word is the same. So when we read here the word testament, we are actually talking about covenant. So it says, where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. For a testament is a force after men are dead, otherwise it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth. Now you've heard of the last will and testament, haven't you? That's a covenant. That's the last covenant that a person makes. And when does that covenant really go into operation? When is your will administered? Only after your death, isn't that right? And so it says here, a testament or a will or a covenant is a force after men are dead. And so you must wait until after death, after the shedding of blood or after the death of the person, before it can be properly applied or administered. Otherwise, it says it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth. Well, we can understand that. We can see that. So then, that means that Christ's covenant could not have gone into operation until when? After He died, see. After He shed His blood and died and confirmed it and ratified it and sealed it, why the new covenant began to operate. But only after He died on the cross and sealed it with His blood.
Joe, it surely is true. Untold millions are confused about the two covenants in the Bible. Friends, you need a copy of this important message. And I'll give you the address in a moment. But first, here are the Amazing Facts singers with This Could Be the Year When Jesus Comes.
What if this would be the year when Jesus comes? The year that we've been waiting for so long. sweet hand.